This is an archetype that has existed since the dawn of storytelling, the femme fatale, the woman who brings about the destruction of her lover, and there are many possible explanations for why this story appears over and over again. But today, I want to try a new one. I want to try explaining it using the ideas of the French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan and the French anthropologist René Girard. Let's start with the myth of Persephone, the story that inspired the Disney movie. Snow White is a typical tale of the deadly female figure. Snow White's stepmother is so obsessed with staying the fairest of them all that she orders the girl's murder after hearing that the girl has surpassed her in beauty. Of course, she can't get away with it because, Snow White slips into a death-like coma instead. In some versions, she even escapes into the woods only to stumble upon a grave. This archetype doesn't always involve a jealous stepmother, or even a woman who intends to kill. The classic example is Medea from Greek mythology. She falls madly in love with the hero Jason and helps him retrieve the Golden Fleece, but when he leaves her to marry another, she murders his entire family. What links these two archetypal stories? The answer lies in the nature of the women themselves. They are both femmes fatales, which literally means fatal women. That is, they bring about the destruction of their lovers. Now, if you've been watching this channel for a while, then you already know my take on this. I tend to think that the explanation for these stories lie in the realm of female nature, specifically in a biological drive to preserve their own genetic material. If you haven't watched those videos yet, I'll leave them linked in the description below. But today, I want to do something different. I want to approach this phenomenon from the perspective of what we might call a Lacanian feminist. Someone who adopts the theories of the French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan to understand how desire functions in human beings. And that's not just me saying, oh, women are evil. It's a serious attempt to understand this destructive force within relationships by looking at our own desires. But before we dive into that, I need to quickly introduce myself. I'm a writer and the author of several books about mythology. My new book is called And Explores the Origins of the Witch Craze of Early Modern Europe. In the 14th through 17th centuries, thousands of women were accused of consorting with the devil. I examine how this dark period of history arose out of a confluence of factors, including religious extremism, political upheaval, and misogyny. I argue that the so-called witches were victims of a movement whose leaders created a climate of fear to seize power in a time of crisis. The problem is that this happened 600 years ago and nobody's been talking about it. So, until now, you can learn more about it through the provided resources. In Lacan's theory, humans don't really have any stable identity of our own. Instead, we adopt the traits that other people show us and become who we are through the reflections of others. He called this process the mirror stage, which is the moment when the infant first recognizes itself as a separate being through the reactions of others. However, we don't stop there. Lacan argued that we go on to imagine how others see us and form an ego ideal based on that imaginary reflection. But here's where things start to get complicated. We also imagine how other people imagine us. So we imagine what other people imagine us, imagining them. And this imaginary scenario forms the basis of what Lacan calls desire of the other, which is a concept that explains how our desires are always mediated through our perceptions of other people. In other words, we don't really know what we want until we see how other people want us to be. And that desire is always incomplete because the other can never fully give us what we want, because the other doesn't really know what we want either. And that incompleteness drives us insane. Okay, I know that was a lot to digest, but let me give you an example. Let's say your mother used to tell you how pretty you are when you were young. You internalize that and it becomes part of your ego ideal. You want to be beautiful like your mother told you that you were, but then you realize that other people don't seem to think you're beautiful and you feel incomplete. And so you start to imagine how other people imagine you, and that desire drives you to change yourself. But then you end up changing who you are to fit the expectations of strangers who don't even know you, which ends up making you miserable. And that desire will never end. You will never obtain it because other people's opinions are always shifting and their approval is conditional. You could spend your whole life trying to win the approval of the other, but it will never be enough. You will never be complete. Lacan believed that this desire of the other was the root of all neuroses, and that's exactly what happens in the myths of the femme fatale. The male characters are driven mad by the desire of the other. In the story of Persephone, the goddess Demeter is so overcome with grief when she learns her daughter has been kidnapped by Hades that she causes the earth to be barren. Crops fail, people starve, and the king of the underworld offers her a deal. If she stops acting so dramatically, he'll return Persephone to her. But Demeter refuses unless Hades coughs up 3 magic seeds. He spits them out and she plants them and grows 3 trees, each bearing golden apples. Then she sits on one of the tree branches to admire her work and falls into a deep sleep. In this state, she's discovered by the god Zeus, who rapes her repeatedly, and she gives birth to 4 sons. In some versions of the myth, he even makes her swear an oath that she'll marry him, and that's why she is unable to fully reunite with her daughter, because she is now bound to Zeus by her oaths. All of this destruction arises from the desire of the other, the desire of the people of Earth, who need Persephone to return and make the crops grow again. Demeter is so overwhelmed by their suffering that she creates the season of winter. Her anger and depression last until Hades gives her proof of Persephone's undying love. He tricks her into eating some pomegranate seeds, which ties her to the underworld forever. When Demeter realizes she has been tricked, she curses Persephone, saying that no girl who eats from the underworld can remain pure and untouched, and that's why Persephone must spend part of every year dying and being reborn in the underworld. Now, obviously, this isn't exactly how seasons work, but I think you can see how the desire of the other, in this case, the desire of humanity, drives the plot forward. The same goes for Medea. She doesn't want to be left by Jason. He is her beloved. But she is also aware that other people think he's hot, and she imagines how he imagines her, and that drives her to murder. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should abandon reason and logic in favor of emotion. Obviously, we need to keep our cool and think things through, but the Lacanian view of desire suggests that we should be careful of the effects of the other on our psyche, because it can lead us to ruin, and that is not a risk worth taking. Desire can turn us into monsters, but it can also inspire us to create art, to have children, to accomplish great things. It's a powerful motivator, and understanding its mechanisms is essential to living a fulfilling life. In his book, The Seduction of the Innocent, the psychoanalyst and father of French Claude Lévi-Strauss writes that the fairy tales we tell children are actually disguised ways of teaching them about incest and other cultural taboos. He argues that behind these seemingly simple stories lie complex symbolic structures that teach children how to navigate the rules of their society. For example, Cinderella is forbidden to attend the king's ball, but she defies her stepsisters and goes anyway. In doing so, she breaks a social taboo. But the punishment fits the crime. She's made to clean the house, which is a task typically reserved for women of low stat. By breaking the rules, she loses her status and is forced to perform domestic chores. By punishing Cinderella, the story teaches young girls the importance of following social norms and behaving modestly. And if you want to learn more about the hidden meanings behind other fairy tales, I recommend checking out this video on Snow White, which explores the darker aspects of the story that most people miss. You can find it on the provided resources. In my last video, I explained how the desire for younger women may have been encoded into our DNA, because the spread of our genes depends on attracting a mate who is able to bear children. As humans, we are programmed to seek out youth and beauty, because that is an indicator of fertility. But this instinct can be problematic when it becomes an obsession, because we have to be careful not to harm the object of our desire. But the story of Persephone shows that this is not always possible. The desire of the other can be so powerful that it drives us to do terrible things, and sometimes we can't escape the destructive impulses of our own psyche. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you to my supporters for making it possible.